That's okay.
Oh, we can fix
Probably. Hi, welcome to Progressive Soup. Emily Volpintesta, co-host. Start the show.
Hi, thank you to our show. I'm Emily Volpintesta with David Stevenson. Our guest today is Michael J. Zacchea, medically retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel, who is also a candidate for the Board of Education in Brookfield, Connecticut. So, Michael, what made you get involved in politics? This first foray in
Sure.
politics now that you're entering.
Thanks for having me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
So what caused me to get involved in politics? I have been involved in politics at the national and state level as a veterans advocate and activist, getting laws passed that help veterans. Actually, just this year, through the Connecticut Veterans Chamber of Commerce, we were able to get the military pension is now 100% tax-free in our state, state income tax-free. So that was a big win for us. So I have been involved in politics, but I started to get involved locally in Brookfield 2 years ago when there was a scandal in the Board of Education, a embezzlement and overspending by $1.2 million in the, which was as a result of a policy that was carried over for like a decade. But the school business manager has subsequently been fired and arrested and indicted for embezzlement, etc. At the same time, in the town of Brookfield, a small minority of the Republican Town Committee created a third party to get around statutory party representation laws in the state. So in the state, for every municipality, you have to have 3 selectmen, 2 from a majority party and 1 from a minority party. So basically what they did was they stacked not just the first selectman, but also the Board of Finance, and they're trying to stack the Board of Education with people from this, basically it's a splinter party of the Republican Town Committee. It's basically the local Tea Party group who are extremely anti-taxes and anti-education. So what that means is that the majority of Brookfield's citizens are completely without any voice in their local government. So that's why I'm getting involved.
How does these? I'm always curious how these scandals get discovered. Like embezzlement, and how do these things get?
Well, they have to do an annual audit, and they were doing the annual audit, and the annual audit is a function of the Board of Finance, is doing an audit of the Board of Education's books, and the previous auditor who had allowed this policy for like a decade had died suddenly in a car accident. So they got a new auditor who said, "What the heck is going on here?" And the town said, "Well, we've always been able to do it before. Nobody said anything." And said, "No, you cannot do this. This is illegal." And then as they looked into the so-called overspending, and they would bring it forward every year for 10 years, so it ballooned into this gigantic debit. They found the embezzlement, or the alleged embezzlement, by the school business manager.
Now, you also do a lot of work with veterans. You're also part of the Connecticut Veterans Chamber of Commerce, in charge of legislative policy operations, and an official spokesperson. Would you like to talk a little bit about your work there?
Right. So I've been deeply involved in the veteran business owner community in the state for more than 5 years. And one of the things that we found about Connecticut is it has more than 42,000 veteran-owned businesses that produce about $20 billion worth of state product, and that's a significant fraction of the state's overall economy that has never been organized and has never had any advocate in either the General Assembly or to the executive branch. So the market feedback that we were getting from veteran business owners that we knew is that they wanted to have a voice in what was going on in Hartford, and we became that voice, and we've had I'm proud of the legislative successes that we've had. in 2014, we got the Stolen Valor Act passed. And then last year, we got the military pension tax exemption passed. So, we're providing real value to veteran business owners in the state.
Now, do you think now being part of if you win the post in Board of Education, would that take away time that you spend and your work with veterans? Is this,
I don't think so. I do a lot. I have a lot of hats. But, I have been active politically in Brookfield now for several years. It is an additional time commitment, but I don't see why I would, because I have enough hours in the day to take on the added responsibilities. There is some concern about. I'll give you an example. My son now is in kindergarten. He just entered kindergarten this past September, and the school classroom sizes are the highest they've ever been, and much higher than state guidelines. And then the comparables in the our comparison groups. We're running on a platform of funding our schools at a level that would allow us to get back within state guidelines and for us to compare favorably to the schools in our comparative group.
Okay. What would be schools?
Glastonbury is one. New Fairfield. They're all around the state, so they're not necessarily local, but
so they're school systems that have a comparable number of students.
Right, comparable number of students and comparable socioeconomic makeup, demographic makeup.
Yeah, I was wondering why Board of Education. I didn't know you had children in the school system, so that would make sense why you'd have an interest in the educational system of your town.
Right.
No. So you're a candidate for the Board of Education, and also I had a question. You mentioned you have a documentary coming out in November. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's called Thank You for Your Service. It's by Creative Chaos Venture Media Group, and it's based on a book of the same name. And the theme of this documentary is how the military does or does not do mental health care. And it addresses the really national crisis in veteran suicides and veteran high-risk deaths within 4 years of returning from a combat zone. And then it goes on to advocate for two basic positions. A call to action is, one, to develop a behavioral health corps separate from the medical health corps in the military, and then two, to create a reverse boot camp for when they're getting out, because we put all this time and effort in them in the first 8 to 12 weeks when they're coming on board to turn them into soldiers or sailors, but we put 1 week of effort into them when they're transitioning out of active service, and the transition has suffered because of the disparity in effort.
So, and being a candidate for Board of Education, can you segue your history, doing work for the veterans? Can that experience help you in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Board of Education.
My job at UConn is I am an academic specialist, and through that position, I run something called the Entrepreneur Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. So I'm highly sensitive to the need for a first-class education to compete in the 21st century global economy. And this is true for veterans, and it's true for kids who are just entering school. One of the reasons that veterans have such a high unemployment rate and generally have lower economic attainment once they do get into the workforce is something called skills-biased technology change. So employers look at veterans as people who have been out of the workforce for 4 years or 8 years, and that their technology ability has basically atrophied. So they bring them on board, if they do bring them on board, as basically just entry-level people. which is the furthest from the truth because the military really has cutting-edge technology.
Right.
I was going to say, it seemed like the technology might actually be even better
Yes.
amongst veterans than the average person.
Right. It's a market inefficiency, labor market inefficiency. Anyway, to go back to what you were asking.
Right.
So my advocacy for veterans, I think those skills apply to my advocacy for student children.
Right, and I think even in the school system, you want to bring greater awareness to mental illness in society, but also in the schools too. I think it's something we should be talking about, you know?
Well, one of the things that we are talking about is putting veterans on in the state curriculum, the required teaching parts of the state curriculum. In the state the requirements of the state curriculum includes a module about minorities, a module about ethnic minorities, a module about women, etc. So we would like for there to be a module about veterans, what veterans contribute
That's interesting.
as well. The state basically has a structure that recognizes women, minorities, and disabled people as a protected class.
Right.
And veterans in our state, and I believe nationally, but veterans in our state, I think should be included in that protected class.
Oh, it's very interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah. So you're really bringing a voice to the veterans
Right.
in the state.
Yes.
Right. And in the school system, so what do you mean you're having a module in elementary school or, the public schools?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. It would basically come under state requirements for civics education.
Do kids in school, I guess Brookfield in particular, do they have the opportunity to have a veteran or veterans?
They do. Many
visiting
schools
school?
do that on their own. Many schools do that on Veterans Day. Now the movement is to make,
Right.
instead of having off Veterans Day, they have school during Veterans Day, and then
Yeah.
they have
Right.
a number of veterans come in. And I have done that. I've come in and spoken to schools. There's a nonprofit education organization called the Education Connection, which is in 31 school systems in basically Northwest Connecticut. That also is sort of they bring them in to teach the civics. So I've done that for them as well in terms of veteran stuff.
Wow.
So you yourself have actually gone into school.
Yes, correct.
What type of response do you get, and what kind of questions do you get from the boys in the class versus the questions you get from the girls in the class? Is there any difference?
Almost no girls ask questions. Sometimes they'll say, my grandfather was in the Army, or
Right.
somebody in my family was in. In fact, as a matter of fact, in Brookfield, my son, actually they're twins, but in his class, there are these two girls who are twins. The twins' parents' grandfather is a Medal of Honor recipient. He was based in Massachusetts, but well-known Medal of Honor recipient. So, sometimes you run into things like that. The boys often ask, did you kill anybody? Did you drive a tank? Did you shoot a gun? Stuff like they see on TV.
Yeah.
And do you think it being shown in the media so much, do you think, sometimes you think, I remember if you see so much in the media, do you think people become immune or numb to stuff?
No,
now?
I think that, actually I think that our kids are getting pretty militarized. That when I was growing up, we had G.I. Joes, but
Right.
the military was not as prominent and not as lionized as it is now. We never had veterans come in and speak to us when I was in school.
Yeah.
There was not the kind of market for books and movies about veterans issues that there are now.
Right,
In
true.
fact, they were few and far between. So, it's a very, very different landscape now, and kids are much, much more aware
Right.
of, even though many kids are not connected at all to veterans, they're much, much more aware of, I wouldn't necessarily say veterans, but military stuff. They sort of absorb people talk about, the Middle East and ISIS and et cetera.
I know you've been on the show quite a few times, and we've talked at length about how folks that have not just been in war, but generals specifically, that know what it's like to send other people's kids into combat, to die, to be blown up, to kill, have become actually some of the most vocal critics of war.
Yes, right.
Is that something that that comes up in discussions with school kids?
Yeah, some of if they're a little bit older, like junior high school or high school, or
more closer to the age where they're going to make that decision to enlist or not to enlist.
So yeah, there is some of that, and would you do it differently, or would you change your mind, or how do you feel about your service and things like that. So and yeah, of course you have to tailor your presentation to your audience.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, how do you feel about movies and books being written now about the war? American Sniper. I mean, all these. How do you feel that they're showing much more in the media now about war?
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn about it, and sometimes I think we've done a little bit too good a job of telling the veterans' story.
Right.
And I would like to see a balanced telling of both the war experience and the coming home experience.
Right. Interesting.
I think that our war movies tend not to talk about the costs of war.
Right.
You only see the action on screen, and you feel the emotional tension, and people think, oh, that's pretty cool, that's what it must be like, but it's actually much different than anything in any of the movies, and they never ever show the true costs of the long-term costs of war and caring for veterans.
It is a rarity.
Yeah.
It is a rarity. The Best Years of Our Lives, a great black and white film post-World War II, where three young men come back and they've got varying.
Yes, that was a real iconic movie, because nobody had ever talked about the struggles of veterans coming home before that.
And yet it's quite clear. It's quite clear that they come back, and society, people that are family and friends even have a tendency to say, thanks for your service, please don't talk about it.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that was a grump, and a lot of the movies I think try to whitewash a lot of this stuff, try to sanitize the experiences, and try to sanitize what it's like to come home. And I'm sure that there's a commercial reason for that. People don't go to the movies to feel sad, or to say, oh, geez, But I also think that there's an element of manufactured consent, because these are corporations making these movies, and they have a vested interest in promoting a certain narrative of American exceptionalism and superiority.
Yeah.
Now, how about this book? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I finished writing a manuscript called The Ragged Edge about my year in Iraq as the first Iraqi advisor with the 1st Iraqi Army Battalion. We're pretty excited about it. It's been a long time in the making. I started it in 2006 when I was in my rehabilitation for my wounds. It's really because it's taken so long to write, because so much of my understanding of the war and my experience has changed over time, and two, the news cycle has changed over time. So, in 2006, 2007, 2008, the narrative about the war was much different. Now that ISIS is, raised its ugly head and has basically destroyed half of Syria and half of Iraq, I think that there's a lot more interest in the aftermath of the Iraq War.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that, can you see a correlation between what happened back then? I know we talked about Lawrence of Arabia, and how that segment history when the British cobbled these three diverse groups together into Iraq.
Right. Basically, that's what's happening, is that the whole thing is being unraveled, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and all of that. And after Lawrence of Arabia, they set up the Saudi Kingdom, and then in Iraq they set up the Prince Faisal, went up there, and in short order he was sort of made a ceremonious figurehead, and they implemented a parliamentary system with the prime minister. And the United States, our CIA got involved with that to hold them up as a bulwark against the Soviets. They were sort of in the Soviet sphere because they had all the Soviet equipment and stuff, but that's why our CIA developed Saddam Hussein as an agent, as a asset, and the rest is history. He had the several coups, late 60s, early 70s, and he finally took over the country. Yeah. And we've been on a certain kind of glide path since then to where we are now.
What's the RCIA? You said the RCIA.
Our
CIA. Okay.
Right. RCIA. Yeah, I thought about that for a moment myself. Okay, but so back to the Board of Education. Right. What aside from getting class sizes back in line with other comparable towns, what specifically do you see as needs? Do you want to talk about the teaching to tests, to the new system that we have, not the one that the President Bush pushed through, but the one that we have now, which I think is a little Common Core, which is a little bit it's state run. The state dictates that rather than the federal government. But you want to talk about Common Core a little bit?
My wife is a teacher as well, and I more or less don't believe that the constant testing of children is proof of education. What I really think is that children need exposure to a lot of things, and then at some point in time they sort of, when their brains gain a sort of critical mass, they start making these connections. A certain side, the political side, wants to turn this into or turn the education system into a production line. If you put in part A, and you add value part B, C, and D, and if you measure at every point, at the end you get an acceptable product E. But part of the problem is, so that's one thing, but the other problem is in our school system, because what they want is efficiency, not effectiveness. So they have disposed of a third non-Romance language. So the school system here has French and has Spanish, but whereas all the other schools in our comparative group offer multiple additional languages, our school does not. And unfortunately it makes our students, I think, puts them in a disadvantage to compete in the 21st century global knowledge economy. So my son just entered kindergarten in September 2015. He's going to graduate from high school in 2029. He'll be the class of 2029. Wow. What is the economy going to look like then? And how is he going to miss out or not be able to compete based on the lack of offerings at the very beginning of his school life?
Interesting.
So why are they removing the third Romance? I know Brookfield used to teach Italian. I knew a woman who taught Italian at Brookfield, but
they basically said that enough kids didn't take the third language. Okay. Two, that they would never go on to use whatever a third language would be. They would not use that in college or in their careers or whatever. And really, what it came down to was cost effectiveness. They did not see the return on investment for their education budget for a third language.
What are things, because I heard they're not teaching cursive in schools anymore. Like, why? What's behind that? Because I always thought, how are you going to sign something, or sign your name, or sign a check, or sign a document if you can't write cursive? You
you only have so many hours, and what would you rather be doing? Teaching somebody cursive, or teaching somebody how to write on a either on a tablet or on a
Right.
laptop.
I guess it's just, you're right.
It's kind of a normal transition.
Changing
I don't know.
technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is another point, is that Brookfield has the fewest number of computers per student in our comparative district as well. So, we're really shortchanging our kids, unfortunately. And, I want to turn that around.
I always felt like when I taught that you taught the arts, you taught things that would grab kids' imaginations
Right.
more than you would the basics. Because once the kids realize that, in order to be good at this, I better learn the baseline type of stuff.
Well, this is part of a more overall Republican point of getting rid of arts and letters, and getting rid of art class, and getting rid of language classes, and getting rid of any class that doesn't immediately produce some sort of business dividend.
Less tangible, but probably more important in a lot of people's eyes.
And this is around the country, and especially in the red states, where Republicans have gotten a hold of their respective state boards of education and are at the state level, at the state university research level, just lopping off all kinds of programs because in their mind they don't produce revenue.
So, if you win this post in the Board of Education, are you for the changes that are taking place? Would you introduce changes? Would you like to see changes in the Board of Education?
We definitely need changes.
Okay.
What's happened in the last 2 years in the Brookfield Board of Education is really scandalous, and we definitely would like to see changes. And put our kids back on a footing that many years of kids going through the Brookfield education system enjoyed before this sort of cabal of people took over in 2013.
Wow. So interesting. Well, I hope, that there are these changes. So that would be like bringing back the arts and bringing back, more creative. Yeah, making education not so much, you said... Well,
really it's about funding, and it's about, for the last few years, they have funded the schools less than the 1 year we had no funding.
Thanks for joining us. Looks like we're just about run out of time. Any final thoughts?
Please check us out at the Brookfield Democrat Town Committee. You can check out our website and our platform. And again, I'm asking for your vote on November 3rd. Vote row A.
Great.
Thank you for joining Progressive
us.
Soup, and